So if you are coming across my channel on the first time, don't hesitate to subscribe, because in this channel we provide fascinating and digestible medical videos that will assist and help you in passing medical board exam. Now let's proceed. Before I delve into implantation, I would love us to appreciate or recall some certain embryological event that took place in the first week of gestational period, so that we will have the background knowledge on what implantation is all about. Yeah. So this diagram here depicts what that occurs in the first week of gestational period or gestational age, right? This is the uterus. This diagram here depicts the stages of implantation. The stages of implantation which occurs in the second week of gestational period. It is essential that you know the gestational period of the embryo, right? From first week is all about what? Fertilization. It's all about fertilization of the what? Of the secondary oocyte. First week is all about fertilization of the secondary oocyte. That is from fertilization to the early implantation period. Second week of the gestational period is all about implantation and development of the extraembryonic membrane, such as the placenta, the chorion, the decidua, the amnion, the amniotic fluid, the amniotic sac. Those ones, and also implantation, occurs in the second week of gestational period. Whereas from third week, what embryonic event that occurs in the third week is gastrulation, which is the development of the embryonic germ layers, right? Which give rise to several organs and tissues of the body, right? The fourth week is all about neurulation, the formation of the neural tube, the notochord, and all rest, the brain and other part of the brain, right? From fifth to eighth week is called organogenic period. The organogenic period, that is the stage whereby heart and other organs began to evolve or develop. Already, gastrulation have taken place in the third week of the gestational period, right? Thereby providing linings in which heart evolve from the fifth week of gestational period. Now, from ninth week to from 9th week to 38 weeks is called the fetal period, right? So those are the gestational period and age of the embryo, right? Okay, let's begin with the event. Let's give like a summary on an event that took place on the first week before we dive into the implantation, which is our major study, because we have to create the background basis so that we understand what implantation is all about. This is the ovary. This is the ovary, right? This is the ovary. Now, the first thing that will happen is ovulation, which is the release of egg, right? Ovulation will take place. Once ovulation occurs, that is the release of egg from the ovary, it will come out and stay in the what? In the ampulla, right? It will come out and stay in the ampulla, right? Waiting for fertilization to take place. So this is the ovulating secondary oocyte. Ovulating. This is the ovulating secondary oocyte, right? Here is the ampulla where the fertilization takes place. Fertilization takes place. So this is ampulla. Ampulla. Ampulla is the largest part of the fallopian tube, right? Where the where fertilization takes place. So this is the event that occurs here is called fertilization, whereby there is a fusion of the male and female gametes to form the zygote, right, which is the early embryo. So what that happens here is called fertilization. Fertilization happens here. It is called fertilization. These events are those events that occurs in the first week of gestational period or first week of pregnancy, right? So after which zygote will be developed. Zygote will be formed, right? Recall that it is day one. Day one. Recall that ovulation occurs in the 14th week in every month of a woman. So the egg must be released. So the egg has been released. It will fertilize in the ampulla. From the ampulla, the egg has been fertilized already. Will form our zygote, which is the early embryo. So once zygote has been formed, zygote will undergo a specialized mitotic division, which increases the number of a cell without the mass of a cell. That is called the cleavage. Cleavage is a specialized mitotic cell division which occurs in a zygote to increase the number of a cell without the mass of a cell. So this is where it takes place, where cleavage will occur. The cleavage will occur in a zygote to form two cell stage. So from here, you have two cells stage. It will still divide to form three cell stage. I mean 4 cell stage, not 3. 4 cell stage. All these are cleavage reaction. They are cleavage reaction, right? The last reaction that we evolve to develop the 16 cell stage, which appears like a mulberry fruit, is called the morula. Morula will take place, right? Because those cells called the blastocell will have to divide, forming numerous cells up to 16 number to form morula. And morula simply appears like a mulberry fruit, right? That is why it's called a morula. Now, the cells of the blastocell, which forms the morula, will divide into two cavities. To divide into two aspects of a cell, thereby creating a large cavity called the blastocell cavity. Go and watch my video on cleavage and blastocyte formation. I've done the video. It's on my channel, right? So these cells will divide into two to form the inner mass cell, which is the inner layer of a cell, and the outer mass cell, which is the outer layer of a cell. That inner mass cell is called the embryoblast, while the outer mass cell is called the trophoblast. The embryoblast actually forms the embryo, while the trophoblast forms or generates nutrients for the developing embryo, right? It also participates in the formation of the placenta and also production of the HCG, which is called human gonadotropin, human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. I will talk about it as we proceed. So from here is the cleavage division. Cleavage took place in this zygote in order to form numerous cells, right, which participate in the formation of the blastocyte. Now, we have formed our morula. Morula have to form the blastocyte, right? Because there are two cells of the blastocyte, the embryoblast and the trophoblast. Now, this is the blastocyte cell, which is also the developing embryo. This is the blastocyte cell. blastocyst cell, the blastocyst cell. So recall that there are two cells that form the blastocyst, which is the embryoblast and the trophoblast, right? From day 1 to day 5 is the blastocyst formation, right? That means blastocyst forms 5 days post fertilization. That means it occurs 5 days after fertilization. So once fertilization takes place, it occurs 5 days after fertilization. Now, according to obstetricians, they define pregnancy as pregnancy is being described as the last day a woman sees her monthly period, in assumption that fertilization has occurred 2 weeks later. That is the concept of pregnancy according to obstetricians. That yes, pregnancy takes place the last day a woman sees her monthly flow or menstruation, on assumption that fertilization has taken place 2 weeks later after that event. Before that event, not after that event. Now, that is how it occurs. So, the blastocyst will be trying to implant into the uterine epithelium called the endometrium, right? So it is going to implant. So here is the blastocyst implant. Okay, you have to understand that there is a glycoprotein coat that protects the oocyte or the developing embryo as it is going along the fallopian tube, so that it will not implant in any place that is not the actual place for blastocyst implantation or the embryo implantation. That is called the Zona pellucida. It guides the developing embryo with jealousy. So this is the Zona pellucida. The Zona pellucida. It is a glycoprotein coat that protects the embryo or the oocyte. As you can see, it remains on the embryo till time of implantation. Now, on the time of implantation, the blastocyte, because the embryo does not implant with the Zona pellucida, it has to hatch. The embryo has to hatch off from the Zona pellucida so that it can implant on the endometrium of the uterus. That is the uterine epithelium, right? So the blastocyte has to secrete an enzyme called protease enzyme. Protease enzyme will digest the Zona pellucida so that the embryo will hatch out in order to implant on the endometrium. As you can see here, there is no Zona pellucida in here. No Zona pellucida covering or protecting the developing embryo. But here, implantation has not occurred. Implantation is not getting ready yet. So it has to protect the developing embryo, right? So as they are trying to implant, which is the embryo, the blastocyte will secrete an enzyme called protease. Protease will digest the Zona pellucida because the Zona pellucida is a glycoprotein coat. So it's a protein. This enzyme that is being secreted by the blastocyte will digest the Zona pellucida so that the embryo will get ready for implantation. That is why one of the cardinal functions of the Zona pellucida to the oocyte or developing embryo is that it prevents the embryo from implanting in an abnormal site. That is the site that is not the actual site for its implantation. That is why if the Zona pellucida does not protect the developing embryo, it will implant in any place, leading to ectopic pregnancy, leading to ectopic pregnancy. That is when the zona pellucida is not or did not actually protect the developing embryo till the actual site of implantation. So it will implant in an abnormal site, leading to ectopic pregnancy, right? So this is where it gets implanted. This is the endometrium of the uterus. This is muscle layer. This is also muscle layer. This is also the uterine wall, right? This is uterine wall. So this is the event that occurs in the first week of gestational period. Apart from implantation, implantation does not occur in the first week. It is the early event that took place in the second week of gestation, of gestational period. So from fertilization to blastocyst formation occurs in the first week of gestational period. That is why blastocyst formation or the formation of the blastocyst occurs 5 days post fertilization. That means it occurs 5 days after fertilization. That is formation of the blastocyst, which composed of 2 cells, the embryoblast and the trophoblast. So these are the events. You can see that the blastocyst or the developing embryo has fully implanted in the uterine epithelium called the endometrium, right? So this is the full implantation of the blastocyst or the developing embryo. This is the embryo. Developing embryo. This is where it has fully implanted. So these are the events that took place for the implantation of the developing embryo or the blastocyst. Now, before I explain this diagram, let's dive into what we have today as the implantation. Right? The first thing is the introduction. What is implantation? Yeah, recall that all I've been saying is to give the basis of implantation coming from the first week of gestational period or the pregnancy. So we are now diving into the implantation, which is for the second week of gestational period. Second week of gestation. So implantation is actually the embedding of the developing embryo or the blastocyst on the endometrium of the uterus. Endometrium is a specialized uterine epithelium where the developing embryo or the blastocyst embedded. That is implantation. So it is the embedding of the blastocyst or the developing embryo on the uterine epithelium called the endometrium. Recall that the blastocyst is usually embedded on the posterior wall of the uterus or the uterine cavity. This is the uterine cavity because the uterus have different parts, but where does the blastocyst or the developing embryo get embedded, which is the implantation? It is being embedded or got implanted on the posterior wall of the uterine cavity. That is where it got embedded, thereby begin to develop other organs, other fetal organs, right? That is why the implantation event is essential, because after implantation, what will happen next is gastrulation. But on the time of implantation, there is usually a development of the extraembryonic membranes, such as the placenta, the chorion, the decidua, the amnion, the amniotic fluid, and all that, before gastrulation, which is the formation of the germ layers, the embryonic germ disc, right? Now watch. We have given the concept of the implantation, which is the introduction. So this diagram here depicts the stages of the implantation. The stages of the implantation. As you can see, here is the outer cell mass, which is the trophoblast, right? We call it the cytotrophoblast. The cytotrophoblast. Why this is the cytotrophoblast? This is the endometrial lining. That is the uterine epithelium called the endometrium. Endometrium. In here is the inner cell mass called the embryoblast, which is the future embryo. Recall that the trophoblast can be called the future placenta because it participates in the formation of the placenta, whereas the inner cell mass can be called the future embryo because it is the one that develops the embryo. Embryoblast, right? This remains also the trophoblast or the cytotrophoblast. This is the yolk sac cavity. The yolk sac cavity. This is also the endometrium. Here is the cytotrophoblast. The embryoblast. So, as you can see, this is the first stage of the implantation of the developing embryo. This is the developing embryo as it's trying to implant on the endometrium of the uterus. As you can see, it's trying to implant. On this stage, it is still getting to implant, right? You can see that the developing embryo is found on the surface of the world of the endometrium, right? On this region, is getting deeper to get implanted. On this region, it is also getting deeper. Now, this is where it has fully got implanted, right? So these are the stages of the implantation of the developing embryo or the blastocyst. You can see from 6 to 7 days. That is why implantation occurs 7 days post fertilization. It occurs 7 days post fertilization. So let's proceed. The next outline we shall be discussing is the site of occurrence. Site of occurrence. Where does implantation takes place? Implantation occurs at the endometrium of the uterine cavity. That is where it occurs, the site of occurrence, because it is being embedded on the posterior wall or the posterior aspect of the uterine cavity on the uterine epithelium called the endometrium. So that is it. Look at the endometrium. These are the endometrial cells because they are the specialized cells of the uterine cavity where the developing embryo got implanted as a process called the implantation. So all this cell is the endometrium. The next is the period. At what period does implantation occurs? Implantation occurs 7 days post fertilization, and it occurs on the second week of gestational period. So this implantation occurs count 7 days after fertilization. You can see day 1, day 1, day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Day 5 is for blastocyst formation. That is for blastulation, right? Day 6, the blastocyst is trying to implant. Now, day 7 is when it has fully implanted. That is why we call it that we say that it occurs 7 days post fertilization. That means it occurs 7 days after fertilization, right? So that is the period of implantation of the developing embryo on the uterine epithelium called the endometrium. This remains our endometrium. This is the fibrin ring. Here remains the yolk sac cavity. You can see this remains our syncytotrophoblast, which is a part of the trophoblast. These are the intervillous space. This also remains our endometrium. So the next outline we shall be discussing is the events. The event. What are those events that occurs in implantation? Although I've explained some of them, right? Now, upon blastocyst formation, that is the first event that took place before implantation. Upon what? Blastocyst formation, that is the formation of the blastocyst. There is usually a breakdown or the digestion of the Zona pellucida before the implantation by the protease enzyme secreted by the blastocyst. That protease enzyme will digest what? The Zona pellucida, because the Zona pellucida is a protein that covers or protects the developing embryo or the oocyte from when it has ovulated till getting to the time of implantation, right? So before it will implant, the blastocyst will secrete an enzyme called protease, which will digest the Zona pellucida and get ready for the developing embryo for implantation, right? So those are the events that took place. Okay, you have to understand again that once the developing embryo have getting ready for implantation, where thereby forming two typical cell, which is the trophoblast and the embryoblast. The embryoblast forms the developing embryo, while the trophoblast chooses to provide nutrients for the developing embryo, thereby forming or participate in the formation of the placenta. Now, the trophoblast does what? It produces a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. This hormone will do what? will maintain the corpus luteum. HCG maintains the corpus luteum of the ovary, which in turn secretes a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone will be secreted. This progesterone maintains the early pregnancy, thereby making the endometrium of the uterus favorable for the implantation of the developing embryo, right? That is what it does. One of the functions of the progesterone, because it maintains the early pregnancy, thereby making the implantation of the developing embryo on the endometrium to become easier for it to get implanted, right? Okay, the HCG is detected in the maternal blood, which forms the basis of the early pregnancy test, although it is less detective in urine at that stage. That is why from the first week of gestation to the second week, or on the second week, there is usually the presence of HCG in the blood. So if you go for pregnancy test, you can detect that yes, this woman is pregnant or the woman is pregnant, right? Although it is not usually fully present in the urine, because it is not first being present in the urine, it is usually being first present in the blood first, right? So from the first week to second week of pregnancy or gestation, HCG is usually found in the blood, particularly from the second week of gestation, because the trophoblast has to secrete what? The HCG. So HCG is one of the cardinal occurrence in the blood which detects the early pregnancy test to become positive, right, on the women. So that is how it occurs. Now you have to understand that during implantation, there are usually signs, that is the early pregnancy signs, such as spotting, bleeding, nausea, tiredness, and all that. Those are the signs, right? So the bleeding that usually occurs during implantation is called implantation bleeding. It is not menstrual flow. Once there is fertilization, menstrual cycle or menstruation is terminated. Right? Is terminated. So the bleeding that women mostly see when they are pregnant is called implantation bleeding, because the oocyte or the blastocyst is trying to get implanted on the endometrium of the uterus, thereby shedding off what? Blood. So that is what we call the implantation bleeding. So those are the events that took place on the implantation, whereby the developing embryo is trying to get implanted. So all these are the components. Recall that during implantation, there are so many things that happens. So on the second week of gestation, it is not only implantation that got occur, right? We have all other embryonic structures that get what? Evolved, such as the placenta, the chorion, the amnion, the amniotic sac, and all that. So from third week is now what? Gastrulation, which is the development of the embryonic germ layers or the embryonic germ disc. So I believe you enjoyed the class from the introduction to the event on the implantation of developing embryo. Thank you so much for watching.